Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today covering all the news here in Washington, and I'm happy to be joined at the desk by my friend Stephen Kent.
We're back. Very happy to be here with you.
Good to see you. A lot to get through today.
Well, tell me a little bit about what is in your notes for today.
So it's a pretty somber start today, Stephen, because we're less than 48 hours on from a double killing that shocked this city. The alleged perpetrator has been arrested and charged. 31-year-old Elias Rodriguez of Chicago stands accused of first-degree murder in the deaths of Yaron Leshinsky and Sarah Milgram. Leshinsky, aged 30, and Milgram, 26, were a couple. They were shot dead outside an event held by the American Jewish Committee at the Capitol Jewish Museum on Wednesday night. The charging affidavit asserts that Rodriguez told police at the scene, "I did it for Palestine, I did it for Gaza." It's important for those of us who are sympathetic to the plight of the Palestinians, and I include myself in that, to acknowledge without ambiguity the wrong that was done here. The killing of civilians is wrong. The grief of those who knew and loved Leshinsky and Milgram is impossible for the rest of us to truly imagine, and all we can offer is sympathy and compassion. We've learned some details of the young couple's life. Yaron was apparently set to propose to Sarah next week, when the two had planned to visit Israel. He had grown up between Israel and Germany, the son of a Jewish father and Christian mother. He, like Sarah, worked for the Israeli embassy here in Washington. Sarah held a BA in environmental studies from the University of Kansas. After graduation, she worked for an organization in Israel that sought to improve dialogue between young Israelis and young Palestinians. Her college roommate told the Associated Press that Sarah was, quote, "the ultimate peacemaker in her personal life and her professional life." It's important to know those kinds of details. They allow us to see more quickly the full texture of someone's life and at least begin to grasp the enormity of their loss. It's important to see the full humanity of all victims of conflict and of victims on all sides. And I certainly mean no disrespect to the memory of Yaron or Sarah in saying that that's often not what actually happens. When it comes to coverage of Israel and the Palestinians here in the US, our media reporting and our politicians often suggest some lives matter more than others. To be clear, some reporters here and internationally do the best that they can. Here's a report yesterday from Lindsay Hilsum of Britain's Channel 4 News. It's about the trickle of aid Benjamin Netanyahu's government is finally letting into Gaza after a long blockade.
Children rushed to a place where they'd heard there was hot soup. They scrambled for the scrapings. And most left disappointed and still hungry. If nutritional supplements and food get into Gaza, these children can pull through. But time is running short.
I would like to know, though I'm sure I never will, the name of that little girl in the yellow top and colourful pyjama bottoms screaming in distress, or the baby with the painfully emaciated legs. I'd like to know what their parents, if they're still alive, would say about them or about the trauma of watching a child suffer so badly. I wonder what dreams those parents and children had before the conflict and what dreams they cling to now. I'd like to know more about any of the thousands of Palestinian children killed by Israel over the last 19 months. The Gaza Health Ministry gave a number for the death toll among children this week. Its number is 16,506. It includes 916 infants under the age of 1 and 4,365 children between the ages of 1 and 5. To confront such horror is to be presented with uncomfortable questions. And to be clear, those questions are being asked by some Israelis too. An Israeli opposition leader, Yair Golan, warned just on Monday that his country was on its way to becoming a pariah state. A sane country, Golan said, does not kill babies for a hobby. Now, I've sometimes mentioned here in Rising that I grew up in the north of Ireland at a time when an armed conflict was taking place there. That conflict has many huge differences to what is now going on in Gaza. But I'm often reminded of a phrase we sometimes used back home, a hierarchy of victims. That refers to the unfortunate tendency for media and politicians, and also, if we're honest, all of us, to parcel out our compassion unevenly, to twist our recognition of suffering to fit our preferred political narrative, to suggest that some deaths are more or less deserving of our outrage. Pointing this out is never about downplaying the terrible grief of those who tend to get placed at the apex of that hierarchy of victimhood. But it is to recognise the equally precious humanity of those who get placed below it, so that as we remember the victims of anti-Semitic attacks like Iran and Sarah, we also remember 6-year-old Wadeh al-Fayyoumi, the Palestinian-American boy stabbed to death in a hate crime in suburban Chicago. It's so that when we scrutinise political rhetoric, we hold to account those who target and dehumanize anyone, Jewish or Muslim, Israeli or Palestinian. And so we never forget the people slaughtered by Hamas on October 7th, or the people slaughtered by Israel with the active assistance of the United States government ever since. Is it controversial to say that? Maybe. But it's not, in fact, a false equivalence. It's an act of basic respect.
Well, you put your heart into that. It's hard to get into this topic and not feel exactly what you're feeling. There is just so much widespread death and devastation going on in this conflict in Gaza as a result of the October 7th attacks. And for me, I think my only contention with what you've laid out is there's sort of this competition for empathy. We only have so much to give. And so these two individuals are shot at the Israeli embassy here in Washington, D.C. just a couple of days ago. And the coverage has turned to that because it's odd. It's out of the usual. We haven't seen this kind of thing happen yet, this sort of political violence from the movement, the Palestinian movement here in the U.S., spill out into the streets in this kind of way. And we're covering it. And so there's not some sort of disproportionate coverage going on here of the plight of the Gazans or the Palestinians in Gaza versus Israelis and what they go through. There's just been a pivot. This is a new story. These are people on American soil shot dead. It's sad, and we're going to cover it, and the war is going to continue. It's gone on now for years. There's just so much to cover, and I don't think it's possible for people to actually hold in their hands every single casualty and every single person that dies in a foreign conflict.
Mm-hmm. I think that the way empathy works is complicated. And I think that obviously there's going to be a lot of coverage in a double murder that just happened in this city. Mm-hmm. Now, what I would say is that instances of violence, and I mentioned the young boy who was stabbed by his mother's landlord in Chicago, there was not, to my mind, the same level of soul-searching or outrage about that. There were 3 men of Palestinian heritage shot in Vermont, not fatally to be clear, but shot in Vermont. That story to me seemed to fade from the headlines rather quickly. Now, just briefly or tangentially on the point of accuracy, I am being told by our control room I said the couple were shot outside the Israeli embassy. If I did say that, that was a mistake on my part. They were shot at a reception. But the point is that I think that overall there is a propensity, and I'm not trying to, as I say, minimize anyone's grief, but there is a propensity to weigh those two griefs of the Israeli side on one hand and the Palestinian on the other.
I don't object to that at all. I think the thing that folks on my side of the aisle, I'm a conservative, have been looking at this and going, this is kind of what happens. You have a Chicago young man who's been involved in a lot of these protests, going to a lot of these demonstrations, shouting the slogans, globalize the Intifada. I think the most on-point analysis of this has been globalizing the Intifada requires this exact kind of thing. Rhetoric does have power. It is dangerous, and we need to be more vigilant of the way that we let people off the hook with these kind of slogans and say, oh, it's a metaphor. It's not a metaphor.
Sure, absolutely.
All right, so The View reportedly told to tone down on their Trump coverage. We're going to be getting into that next. Should be fun. Dial it down. That is Disney CEO Bob Iger's message to the hosts of The View, who are known for their hot takes and blunt criticism of the president and his administration. ABC parent company Disney is reportedly feeling the pressure from the president.
That's according to the Daily Beast, that outlines a call with ABC's president and The View's executive producer. Iger told hosts Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, Sonny Hostin, Anna Navarro, Sarah Haynes, and former Trump aide Alyssa Farah Griffin to cool it on the political rhetoric. But the women of The View reportedly told their bosses to take a hike. One source reportedly saying, quote, "This is what our audience wants. Isn't it going to look kind of bad if we're all of a sudden not talking about politics?" They ultimately decided they weren't having it with the, quote, "silly requests," and said they would just keep doing their thing.
In response to the report, former co-host of the show, Meghan McCain, took to X, saying simply, "They will never do that." The suggestion to tone down anti-Trump rhetoric comes as the president continues to put pressure on news outlets that he considers fake news. Trump took aim at NBC News and their reporter during a press event with the South African president on Wednesday.
You are a real, you're a terrible reporter. Number one, you don't have what it takes to be a reporter. You're not smart enough. You ought to go back to your studio at NBC, because Brian Roberts and the people that run that place, they ought to be investigated. They are so terrible the way you run that network. And you're a disgrace. No more questions from you. Go ahead. His name is Peter something. He's a terrible reporter. Quiet. Let's go.
The administration has also repeatedly blocked Associated Press reporters over the wire service's refusal to refer to the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. And it has brought a suit against CBS and 60 Minutes. Amid that furor, both the EP of the show and the president of CBS News have stepped down. Much to discuss here, Stephen.
I think Joy Behar and Whoopi Goldberg are going to tone it down.
I don't think so. I think the market
luck.
for them is to do what they do. I'm well aware that lots of people don't like what they do, but I see it's still the number one daytime network chat show.
Yeah, this is the number one show in that block. I mean, they rival Harris Faulkner on Fox News, or are consistently outpacing that major news network. I don't understand why people watch this show. I think for me, and this is what I was saying on X myself, is the problem with The View is not its anti-Trump rhetoric and criticism, sometimes just deranged criticism of the administration. It's just every discussion. Every discussion is steeped in conspiracy theory thinking, just sort of unhinged wine mom kind of stuff. And it's just never pleasant to watch. And so I'm looking at that going, this is daytime programming on ABC. What the heck, Bob Iger? And I seem to be wrong, because it's a number one rated show. The wine moms love it.
Maybe we are not the target market for it. Maybe I'm the target market and you're not.
I don't think so. But I think it does come back to this is all at the end of the election in November 2024. There were these episodes where legal was constantly in the ear of the hosts and asking them to offer corrections. There was an instance where they had 4 legal note corrections over the course of an entire episode over discussion about Matt Gaetz and Pam Bondi. They just are constantly saying things that are not true, and they are actually concerned about having to do another sort of settlement or payout with the administration.
Look, obviously one should be accurate even if you're in the opinion space. You don't want to be inventing facts or getting things wrong. I wouldn't defend that on The View. I wouldn't defend it on Fox News. I wouldn't defend it anywhere, including here. Now, I do think, though, that, well, 2 points really. One is, plainly the show is popular, so it caters to an audience that like that pretty confrontational tone that they adopt toward Trump and perhaps toward conservatives more generally. And the other thing is that I do think, and we alluded, of course, to this in the introduction, that there is the context here of Trump pushing back and in some cases threatening media outlets, the jabs he threw there at NBC while somewhat amusing in their tone, did also suggest that he was going to try to take on the corporate bosses in some way. Or there could be
yeah, but see, I don't even like
consequences
this
for tough
implication. I mean, kind of connecting the dots between what's going on with The View, which they've faced this kind of thing before, where they've been asked to tone it down. They never do. That doesn't really, to me, connect to Trump's constant badgering of the press his entire political career that we've known him. That connects to Disney not wanting to do another $16 million settlement related to George Stephanopoulos when he just, barely missed the details here in talking about a legal case in which he said he characterized a civil verdict against Trump as a rape conviction rather than sexual abuse, which right there, you can go after them on messing this up when you try to mischaracterize or accidentally mischaracterize without correction people's legal status in terms of their legal issues. So they don't want that.
And I was surprised that someone of Stephanopoulos' experience actually did that. But,
Yep.
so much more we could talk about, but for the moment we will be moving on to inquire whether hot policy has gone up in smoke. We've got the latest next. Stay with us. Hope for loosening marijuana policy may have gone up in smoke. President Trump and former President Biden had supported bringing changes to federal marijuana laws, leaving open the possibility of rescheduling it from the most restrictive class of drugs. But efforts seem to have ground to a halt. Biden's DEA proposed rescheduling it in May of 2024. And while a hearing was dated for January 2025, that went nowhere after Biden's loss. Meanwhile, the current Trump White House released its drug policy blueprint, but there was no mention of cannabis. In fact, Trump nominated an anti-pot guy to head up his DEA.
Per the New York Times, agency leaders who opposed any loosening of restrictions thwarted Biden's goal. Sources now say that under Trump, cannabis reform is as good as dead. It remains a Schedule I drug, the same level as fentanyl, cocaine, and meth. There is public support for loosening marijuana restrictions. A recent Pew Research poll found 57% of adults said that it should be legal for medical and recreational use.
Interesting topic, this one, Stephen. So, I mean, it is fascinating to me how much more popular the idea of at least some loosening of the marijuana laws has become. And then also you have this clash between federal law and state law. I know it's a huge issue here in DC, where the District of Columbia's laws are pretty lax or permissive or whatever term you want to use. But of course the federal law isn't, and a lot of buildings here are federal government property, and so you can smoke on the street but you can't smoke on the property.
I'm sure Janine Pirro will love that. She will be
will.
very easy on pot in DC. But no, I mean, the issue of its support, you know, it's 57% support medical and recreational, and then if you include the people who just support medical, that number jumps up closer to 88% in net. There's this very small sliver of people who remain, who think that it should be, you know, completely kept at the fringes of society. There's just a need for a change here, and rescheduling a drug is not the same as legalizing it, forcing it on the American people. It allows more research to occur on the substance. It allows health authorities to actually more calibrate carefully their dosages that they're giving to medical patients. Like, we're basically stuck here in a situation where we're not responding to the science around marijuana anymore, just political inertia.
Right, and that of course has been a problem with drug policy generally, which has been the prevalence or the predominance of kind of hysteria about it sometimes. I mean, I don't think there's been hysteria around marijuana for maybe a few decades at this point, but you can look back at all those sort of comic, well, now comic warnings, you know, that weed is going to come and destroy your kids and take everyone over. I don't think anyone really sees that now, or it's a very small proportion of people.
And that's because the false equivalence between pot, marijuana, and being on the same schedule as heroin, people know that that is not authentic to the levels of risk that we're talking about with marijuana. For me, I'm looking at this story and going, one, Trump has misled his voters. He made a play for young voters on this issue right before the election, saying that he was going to continue this pursuit and that he was going to pursue rescheduling this drug. Matt Gaetz, who spent some time, he was going to be at DOJ, he has spoken to the New York Times and said that Trump's teetotaler tendencies, which is a great thing, by the way, the guy somehow is sober and does not engage in anything that Matt Gaetz says alters your state of mind. He believes that you just have to be completely cognizant at all times, and he resents any sort of drug or substance that might skew people's judgment in public. And that's something that he's just against, which means he lied to his voters. And then the second point is that DOJ is a tool of the administration, whoever wins the election, and then the DEA is supposed to answer to them. And the DOJ has directed them to change policy, and the DEA is just gumming it up and not letting it happen. Who do they answer to?
Right. No, I think those are all fair points, including the idea that there has been this promise of rescheduling it for some time and nothing has happened. I was startled in researching this story to realize that marijuana is actually scheduled in a more strict way than fentanyl or methamphetamine. I mean, that seems crazy and a very bad fit for where we are as a country right now.
Yeah, there's just nothing happening. I mean, the American people have been pretty clear on this issue. When they were actually pursuing this rescheduling, the Justice Department solicited comments from everyday people across the country. They received 43,000 letters on this issue, which is way higher than average for citizen comment on anything that happens within the agencies, with roughly 70% voicing support for a reschedule or a reassessment of marijuana as a drug policy in the United States. And the government still just doesn't respond to the will of the people on these things. I, for one, am not like a huge personal fan of legalized marijuana or even decrim. I don't like smelling it on my back porch from the neighbors in Virginia where, you know, there are less consequences now for that kind of thing. But this is not the kind of thing where the government should be ruining people's lives and also cracking down on research on this substance so that we can actually make it more effective for medical marijuana patients.
Sure. No, I take all those points, and I think there are pretty clearly established benefits, particularly in the treatment or the alleviation of symptoms of multiple sclerosis and things like that. So I don't think that's really in any doubt. One final point just before we go, you mentioned President Trump's personal views of drug use, which extend also to the use of alcohol. I am critical of him in many, many ways. If you ever see the clip of him talking about the brother of his who died from alcoholism, it's genuinely very effective and a softer version of the president than we normally see. In any event, shocking new documents obtained by the New York Times show the executive branch infighting over Kilmar Abrego Garcia. We'll discuss that next. It's been almost 2 months since Kilmar Abrego Garcia was erroneously deported to El Salvador, with no end to the story in sight. And new explosive documents obtained by the New York Times reveal how Trump officials tried to keep Abrego Garcia out of the reach of the US court system.
The Trump administration has said the deportation was a bureaucratic slip-up, but the situation quickly created intense debates among officials, according to the report. It's led to officials across 3 departments, Homeland Security, Justice, and State, to be at odds with each other.
The documents detail how the Department of Justice was pushing to admit the error, but others weren't agreeing. It also outlines how officials within the Department of Homeland Security clashed over whether to concede the facts of the case, and wondering how they could keep Abrego Garcia in El Salvador. And the officials also fought over how to smear him in the press, including calling him a leader of MS-13.
Meanwhile, the Trump administration asked a federal judge Wednesday to not unseal documents in the case. It comes after a group of 14 media outlets asked the judge to publicize certain court records dating back to the first sealed filing. They say the press has no First Amendment right to certain records.
So Mr. Abrego Garcia is a complicated case, as we were discussing in the break. My position on it, which I've said here before, is that he should not have been deported to El Salvador. And I think there is a lot of obscuring sometimes of that particular fact. Yes, he entered this country without authorization. Yes, immigration court judges did indeed find there was evidence of membership of MS-13. But the fundamental issue is there was an immigration court order saying, don't deport this guy to El Salvador. He was deported to El Salvador. The interesting thing, just briefly, Stephen, about this New York Times story is it basically reveals people within the Trump administration acknowledging that he was deported in error and trying to figure out how they were going to conceal that. And I think that is very telling.
So I want to start with the area of disagreement, and then let's work backwards to the way in which they're trying to conceal bureaucratic errors, which I think we are inclined to agree this is not how government should work. The New York Times report, their headline for this is "A Maryland Man." Not a Maryland man. He's El Salvadorian. He's not an American. He's here illegally. All that kind of stuff. So it makes it so hard for, I think, the public to even know what is really going on with this story. And then my challenge to you is he Peruvian? Is he Venezuelan? Is he Colombian? He's not going to go to those countries. He's El Salvadorian.
Right.
That's where he's going to go. If he's going to be deported, you're not going to deport him to Paris, France. That's the Marco Rubio position, and I'm pretty sympathetic to that case that we're going to send him back to his home country, and we also can't tell Bukele what to do with. There's a process to things, and we should be able to see all the documents in that case. But this whole thing about conflating MS-13 leader versus member, then we've conceded MS-13 member, which is one reason he doesn't want to be in this prison with members of the Barrio 18 gang who are their rivals and might kill him, which is a part of why they want to bring him out of there.
But the point, Stephen, is whether the Trump administration is going to obey a valid court ruling or not. You're making the argument that the proceedings were hazy. They weren't hazy. They were in contravention of a court order, which then this New York Times story shows officials scrambling to try to disguise or conceal or rationalize away in some fashion. So that's the problem. I agree that you can certainly make the hypothetical that, well, we're not going to deport a citizen of El Salvador to some third country. Now, in fact, of course, we have deported Venezuelans to El Salvador, so we do that on occasions. Sure. But the point is that the central issue in the case is a valid court order in this country saying, don't deport this guy to El Salvador, his life would be in danger. And the contravention of that court order, and the contravention having been revealed and discovered, it appears to be no real effort to bring him back.
I genuinely don't understand why it is the business of the American government to follow this person's well-being and related to a gang conflict in his home country. You're correct, right, that this order to keep him out of there, to bring him out of this prison, CICOT, in El Salvador that it is related to his potential harm that could befall him being in this prison with other gang members. We mentioned Barrio 18. This is their rival gang in this region, and he could be killed if he is a member of MS-13. And so I'm just looking at this and going, this judge has made this ruling. Why does this have any validity at all compared to the State Department's directives, which is to get a violent, dangerous gang member, it's a dangerous gang, out of this country and back to his home? I don't like the process. I think the process has been bad, but I am definitely looking at Marco Rubio's position on this and going, this is not a judge's business.
But if you say the process has been bad, you're putting yourself in the role of judge and jury, essentially. You're saying, I don't like the process, I don't think the judge should have ruled that way, so I'm going to ignore it. We can't have a system whereby you or I or anybody, including members of the Trump administration, can say, well, yeah, that's what the court says, but we think that's wrong, so we're going to just ignore it. The process where one believes a court ruling to be wrong is to challenge that court ruling. The Trump administration has not done that. In fact, it shows a lawyer who was subsequently fired, but is something of a hero in this case, saying, look, we can't just try and change that order in the guy's absence. What we need to do here is bring him back, and then we can restart the process.
Arez Rufini, I believe is his name, the fired lawyer. And this is the part where I'm going to come around to your position, which is that Arez Rufini within the Justice Department was fired for his insufficient loyalty to the cause of the administration and this pro-America position of deporting Abrego Garcia and really anybody else. And I think it is a perfectly reasonable position to take that this has been a clerical error. This was actually a mistake. There was a seat opened up and he ended up on this flight erroneously. Just bring him back and then run him through the process again and then send him back to CCOT. Like, that to me is a perfectly acceptable outcome. If he is who you say he is, bring him back, run it through a public process, let everybody see it, and then he's gone again. Done.
I mean, apart from the send him back to CCOT part, I agree with most of that. I think that the point here is actually a due process point. It is about the denial of basic rights and the denial of obedience of a court order. And we see this play out in some of these discussions that are being had, which to my mind are really telling, Stephen, because ever since this case bubbled up, we've had people in the public sphere saying, well, he should have been deported anyway, or what we did was fine. The original position by Mr. Ruvini was to admit that the deportation had happened in error. The administration and also its allies in the media have backpedaled from that and said, no, it was right. What this Time story shows is that they knew it was wrong.
I don't like being gaslit by any administration. Right. Them telling us that this was a thing that was clearly an error and we actually have said it in closed rooms and then we're going to tell the public the opposite. No, 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 no. I do not like that one bit. And Ruvini also said that this handling of the case, this is what his quote to the New York Times, that it jeopardizes many far important initiatives of this current administration. It clearly does. If you actually support what the Trump administration is doing more broadly, this distraction has been a disaster. They need to fix it. And they could do it like that, and they're just choosing not to.
I agree with that point for sure. Absolutely.
So up next, Trump's DHS blocks Harvard from enrolling international students. We'll be back soon.
Harvard University is suing the Trump administration after Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem sent a letter to the university yesterday revoking its ability to enroll foreign students.
The move would also be forcing all current students currently attending on an educational visa to transfer or risk losing their status. Take a look at this. In a statement from DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, she wrote, quote, "It is a privilege, not a right, for universities to enroll foreign students and benefit from their higher tuition payments to help pad their multi-billion-dollar endowments." Noem added an interview on Fox that the university did this to itself. Take a listen.
They have promoted and allowed violent activity on campus. They have allowed anti-Semitism, participation with CCP and Chinese infiltration and influence on their campus, and they haven't protected their students. So we have given them multiple opportunities to share criminal activity with us, backgrounds on these students, to let us conduct the oversight into this program that is our responsibility, and they have refused to do so.
The response from across the political spectrum was swift. Washington Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal calling the move dangerous and unlawful in a post on X and saying, quote, "This will deter talent from coming to the United States and is nothing more than a wannabe dictator trying to bully people into silence." Editor of the Left Hook Substack, Wajahat Ali, took to Blue Sky to point out, quote, "A lot of the elites in the Republican Party have gone to Harvard, have kids in Harvard, and are going to be a bit stuck if MAGA turns on the university."
Meantime, many on the right are applauding the move. Alex Jones posting to X and saying, "No more educating the enemies of America with taxpayer money. Another major victory."
You got the rough end of that, having the quote of Alex Jones, yes, to support your side.
The voice of the right, Alex Jones.
The voice of unreason.
For me, a Jayapal. I think her comment was a little more aligned with some of my concerns about this, which is that, you know, the U.S. is a beacon for incredibly high-skilled foreign talent to come to our universities and study and then create wealth and value in the United States. And throwing the door closed like this, I don't like the word chilling. I'm a little exhausted by it, but it actually does harm the interests of the United States on net. Now, if this is a play, a move to extract some kind of concessions on the way that Harvard is managing their administration and handling student issues on campus, so be it, but on its face, I don't like it. This is actually counterproductive to making America great in the coming century when we have huge competitive threats abroad that we need to face, and that's going to require awesome startups and tech and innovation that comes out of places like Harvard.
Let me begin with the sliver of that I disagree with, because I agree with the vast majority of what you said. The sliver that I disagree with is that I think you seem fairly relaxed about what I see as the Trump administration trying to impose its will on these universities in terms of faculty and in terms of curriculum and in terms of saying that there have to be audits of departments in order to basically get the Trump administration off their back.
To follow Title VI law of the Civil Rights Act, yes, there are always these things, and there's always pressure to behave and protect your students in a certain way and not create hostile environments for people based on race, sex, or class, which Harvard has facilitated.
Well, there are indeed those regulations, but a lot of the Trump demands are cast in far broader language than that. And that's why we're seeing, for example, free speech organizations like FIRE, which to my mind, sort of has positioned itself slightly to the right
I
of
like
the
FIRE.
ACLU. Yeah, talking about the chilling or alarming effects of some of these demands. You know, for
don't
example,
trigger me with that word.
Yeah, I know. I said as soon as it was out of my mouth, I was like, oh, that's the word he doesn't like. But the point about that FIRE was concentrating on was that in this most recent letter to Harvard, there's this demand that Harvard should provide to the government audio or visual recordings of protests, not illegal protests, not illegal activities, protests in which students on non-immigrant visas participated. I think there are genuine reasons to be concerned about that. To get back to the point that we agree on, I think that you make an excellent argument that this is self-defeating. Whatever where everyone comes down on the ideological wisdom of it, or the heavy hand or light hand of the Trump administration. The point is that this is discouraging gifted international students from attending the oldest and one of the premier learning institutions in this country, much as the Trump administration has ripped away funding for research at the very same institution. Those kinds of moves, I think, have a massive blowback negative effect. And just finally on the point about, oh, why are we educating foreign students versus native-born students? Foreign students overwhelmingly pay full price for tuition.
Yeah.
The money that comes from them is often used to subsidize American students from lower or more modest income backgrounds getting reduced fees.
And folks, this is all true. This is exactly as he's laying it out. And I think the thing here that's kind of shocking when you think about the debates that's been had within the Trump administration, it was between Elon Musk and like Stephen Miller and the likes about high-skilled visas versus low-skilled visas, whether or not we should be selective. And Elon Musk found himself on the outside of the administration arguing for, we need plenty of immigration with people who have high skills. For Harvard, 44% of U.S. unicorn founders, these are like the big companies that make a big change, they're coming from India. And then after that, the next runner-up is Israel. These are countries of which bring us incredible talent, incredible companies that do all these amazing things. And some of those companies include Stripe, their Cloudflare, Falcon X, and all of these founders for those companies that I just named, they came from Harvard. So to me, this is politics. This is extracting changes on cultural issues on campus. But I do think that Harvard is going to have to find a way to comply with Title VI in a more meaningful way and show that they are not creating a hostile climate on campus for their Jewish and Israeli students, which they objectively have. And if they can do that, and they provide these documents, these videos, whatever, then I think the pressure will be off. But my worry is that the Trump administration and people in it like Stephen Miller, they are actually ideologically opposed to high school immigration of any kind, and they do want to cut it all off, and they don't want foreign students at Harvard, and that's not going to be a good outcome.
So I have to take issue with the idea that it is objectively proven that Harvard has created a hostile environment for Jewish students. They have argued forcibly against that. The president of Harvard, who is incidentally himself Jewish, Mr. Gerber, has pushed back, I should say, very strongly against that contention.
What does it mean when Harvard's divinity school says that Jewish students should, quote, embrace Zionism, and they promote in their education department a period of white supremacy, a pyramid of white supremacy, which links things like two sides of every story and funding schools locally and colorblindness to racial hierarchies and white supremacy? Do you think that creates a good outcome for Jewish students on campus in any way?
No, I don't think that those things particularly do. Now, I am not going to also argue in every single instance that everything that a Harvard professor says is the right thing. What I'm saying is that Harvard as an institution, led by a Jewish president, pushes back very strongly at the idea that they have created a hostile environment for Jewish students. Now, on the bigger point about how the Trump administration is dealing with this issue, it is, of course, part of a whole range of actions taken against several universities, some of which have, to my mind, caved. I'm sure you see it probably in a different light, but Columbia being the obvious example. And Harvard is going to continue to fight this, and we'll see how that all goes.
We'll see how it goes.
Absolutely. On a lighter note, literally as well as metaphorically, coming up, did Trump's signature orange glow make its way into the Republican tax bill? We'll discuss. Does a sun-kissed tan put the beautiful in Trump's big, beautiful bill? Well, apparently the GOP thinks so, or thought so, or had some view of it, because Republicans are drawing ire for a tanning bed tax break that had been proposed in the bill. The provision would have repealed a 10% tax on indoor tanning services.
The tax break led to a fiery exchange between lawmakers and a Rules Committee hearing on Wednesday. Let's take a look.
And I don't know where this particular provision came from. We do know that there are certain elected officials who appear to have a certain orange hue about them, that maybe they want to make sure that tanning beds get a little bit of special credit. But really, we are prioritizing tanning beds over hospital beds in rural America. Would you please, so that the American public knows what this bill does, one of the little things that it does, would you please read page 901, line 20?
I think it'd be better if you read it.
Oh, he doesn't want to read it.
I'll
read it.
I know the
actually, Ranking Member Moore, Ranking Member Moore
here, so you
Ranking
can read it.
It was a question if you would read it, so I'll ask Ranking Member Moore to read the text. This is in their bill. They don't want to read a line from their own bill. Ranking Member.
I don't want to read the bill for you.
I'll help you out.
I am.
After that exchange, the tanning bed tax break was mysteriously removed in the final bill. Sad. I guess they won't be getting their sun-kissed glow after all, but that didn't stop social media users from unleashing on the proposed provision. Political commentary page Art Candy says, oh, tanning bed companies are getting a tax break while people with skin cancer are getting kicked off Medicaid. None of this is making America great.
Others came to the provision's defense. Investigative journalist Auntie Barnes says they're undoing a frivolous tax imposed by Democrats. Stop gaslighting. Oh boy, we're being gaslit.
We are on the tanning issue. So first of all, just to re-stress, they did eventually pull this provision out of the bill.
Yeah.
It was a politically embarrassing, I think, provision, and I think that exchange showed it, where there was such discomfort about reading the wording of the bill. Now, it is something about an excise tax on tanning beds.
10% to discourage the use of tanning beds for health reasons.
So I have to confess, I am not an expert on the excise duties on tanning beds. I've never been in a tanning bed in my life. I stick with my pasty Irish complexion for the most part.
Yeah, I think this is evidence the Floridians are running the house right now in Washington. So this is a puzzling one. You know, on the surface, this whole notion that they're gonna give a tax break to tanning bed businesses because Donald Trump is a strange color and definitely uses tanning services. Right. That just sort of seems like typical Trump derangement syndrome framing. Like, seriously, why would that actually have any effect or desire of the president? But
he presumably would have the money to pay for tanning of
is
whatever type he wants.
Is he invested in a tanning bed company or something? I don't know. The other thing, though, and just to take the equity viewpoint, these are predominantly female-owned businesses. You could say you're improving the economy and the business prospects of women across the country, and at least every salon in my town is run by African American women, and that's that's a very important perspective. Maybe Republicans were doing that, but I doubt it.
Well, I think it's a fair point to raise, and I will repay your reach across the aisle here by saying that in this bill, and in terms of the later amendments, there was actually one that has Trump's name on it that I agree with, and it's this inclusion of tax advantage savings accounts for children that are going to be called, and I quote, money accounts for growth and advancement, which of course translates to MAGA accounts. But the basic idea is the federal government will give $1,000 to start off a savings account for a child when he or she is born. And I think that is a good idea to try to particularly give lower income children some kind of seed capital, for want of a less
that reminds me of Cory Booker. I mean, Cory Booker had a proposal a couple of years ago on bridging the wealth gap in America between white kids and kids of color and all that kind of stuff, and trying to actually bridge generational gaps in wealth. You know, people got their start in the 1950s and 60s, coming out of the shadow of World War II, enjoying the GI Bill, getting homes, and getting that wealth within your family that then you pass down. And Cory Booker proposed a policy very much like that, which was to, at the very beginning of people entering our country and entering their life, that they have a savings account being created for them. He actually did an event a couple of months ago for BlackRock on retirement, and they proposed this very thing, which is that we need to give people a start for their wealth building, a savings account when they are young, to put towards school, to put towards buying a home. And that's actually a way that we can really help people and try to change both the retirement trajectory in this country and also possibly home ownership.
Sure.
I think that's a good policy.
Right, and just to end on a harmonious note, I think that what that debate shows is how often proposals are judged upon who is proposing them rather than the merits of it. And if Cory Booker and Donald Trump happen to agree on that topic, I think that is an excellent idea.
That would be a wonderful way to go into the weekend.
So, on that topic, it does it for us today on Rising. Be sure to like, share and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thanks, folks. It's been good being with you this week, and we'll see you next week. Have a good Memorial Day.